Welcome to the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. It is June 9th, 2019. I got a question. Why is there such hatred of Jews in the world? Recently, a Palestinian Arab randomly stabbed Jews in Jerusalem. Walking down the street, he began this crazed effort. Of course, in the process, he was shot dead by Israeli policemen. But now he has become the focus of an Associated Press article with a headline about Israelis killing Palestinians. This is the crazy, mixed-up world in which we live here at the close of human history. This latest craziness began when the terrorist was strolling through the old city of Jerusalem a week ago Friday morning, and he happened to see a Jewish man. Seeing this Jewish man, he did the only thing that he thought was logical. He stabbed him to death. The stabber then went a little farther along until he spotted a Jewish child just walking along. So he ran up and he stabbed the child in the back. What possible excuse can there be for such a crime? Well, one suggestion is that the old city is occupied Arab East Jerusalem, meaning the Jewish victims actually were settlers, which makes them legitimate targets for resistance. Resistance to what? Why, to the existence of Jews, of course. Israeli policemen approached the terrorist. He was literally caught with a bloody knife in his hand. And instead of surrendering, he ran, which is why the police shot him. It's about as clear-cut a case as you might imagine, and yet, incredibly, the Associated Press characterized him as, quote, an alleged Palestinian attacker, end of quote. Why? Well, you'd have to ask them. However, in the minds of those who hate Jews or who have a bias toward any who appear to be discriminated against, this probably makes good sense. The problem here is a pesky little thing called history. And then there's settled law and common decency. For example, at what point does one citizen have the right to murder another? Self-defense comes to mind, but not much else, unless we're at war. And secondly, the murder of a child minding his or her own business seems a little bit extreme. My guess is that in the mind of the murderer, his actions made perfect sense. You see, he was an Arab. That's a broad term to reflect any Semite who is not a Jew. And of course, Arabs can kill Jews simply for cause. What cause? Well, that they exist, that they have taken our land, that they worship a competitive God, that they threaten our existence. But the question becomes, historically, is any of this true? Well, some of it is. They do exist, despite the efforts of just about every nation on earth. I'm talking about Israel. No reason for these people to still be here, but they are. The Jews seemingly have taken Arab land that was given them by God 4,000 years ago. Now, it wasn't technically Arab land, but there were Arabs among them. The Israelites were told by God to kill off the inhabitants of this God's promised land. Joshua chapter 1. The Lord spake unto Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, thou and all this people, unto the land which I do give them, even to the children of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot shall tread upon, that have I given unto you, as I said unto Moses. From the wilderness in this Lebanon, even unto the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and unto the great sea toward the going down of the sun shall be your coast. There shall not any man be able to stand before thee all the days of thy life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. I will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. Be strong and of a good courage, for unto this people shalt thou divide for an inheritance the land which I swear unto their fathers to give them. Now, the reality is you have to believe the Bible is God's word to mankind. And the vast majority of people on the planet, then as now, do not. Therefore, they have no problem discounting what I just read and even proving that it's wrong. And the inhabitants of this area were no different. Israel went on to be a large and powerful people, a nation in the region, a region known as Canaan. It was only their rebellion against God that caused their downfall. But even in all that, God promised that He would bring them back, that He would establish them in the land. They would grow large and prosper. It took 1,000 years in dispersion before that happened. But on May 15, 1948, it happened. And of course, at that point, the Arab world declared war on Israel. Israel, who was given the land under Abraham, who forfeited the ability to live on that land through their own rebellion, spent 400 plus years in dispersion, in judgment by God, during which time a whole raft of people came, not just Arabs, but all sorts of people came and set up camp, built cities on their property. When God released them from bondage, He told them to go back and drive these people out and make your home. He was even worse than they, in the sense that He said, kill every man, woman, and child. Don't let any of them live. The goal here was to not let this sort of evil continue to propagate. It was something that was going on. These people were living a pagan life, direct opposition to God in the land that God had set aside for His own. They needed to go away. Israel never did that. Israel never really eliminated these people from the land, and it caused them all kinds of problems. But here on May 15th, 1948, God established Israel in the land once more. And if you were alive at that time, you know what happened. Immediately, the Arab world declared war on Israel. Arabs and other non-Jews who lived there voluntarily left, believing that the 7 Arab nations surrounding Israel would defeat them so that they could then come back. But of course, historically, that did not happen. And a sizable number of Arabs and others who lived in the land have never returned. A great number have filtered back into the West Bank, the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula. And Israel has assimilated many Arabs who are now citizens of Israel. But the vast majority remain sworn enemies of Israel. The region is home to bombings and shootings, Arabs seeking to create enough chaos to facilitate the destabilization of the region, while the West and much of the rest of the world remain committed to Israel's presence, if for no other reason than the stability that she has brought to the region. The random and senseless attacks on the streets of Jerusalem and elsewhere are testimonies to the intense hatred that Arabs have for Israel. It's an ancient antagonism between the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the protagonism of Ishmael and Esau, fueled now by Mohammedanism. This is a battle that will rage until Jesus comes. And only the West exists to keep Israel from all-out war. The West, which is largely Christian, is why Israel is where she is today. In other news, we have Jewish shop owners hounded, threatened, run out of town. Their businesses are the targets of prolonged campaigns of intimidation, culminating in months of demonstrations at their doors with up to 1,000 angry protesters at a time, shooting red paint bombs, mutilated dolls at employees, and so forth. Owners of these businesses threatened with death and with real bombings, the threats including their families, with police refusing to step in, saying the protesters are behaving lawfully. In fact, a top politician supports and is listed as a patron of the organization behind the protests. Since we now know the Nazi boycott of Jewish businesses, which began in 1933, ended, let's talk about what's happening today in the UK. The Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, of which Labour Party head Jeremy Corbyn is a patron, has in reality been waging this campaign against Jewish businesses that sell Israeli products, both those originating from inside Israel proper as well as those made in the disputed territories. And this has been going on since 2001. They have not only targeted Jewish businesses but also the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall, an Israeli theater company at Shakespeare's Globe, and an Israeli LGBT event in London. The group is prominent in the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, we call it. In the news it's called BDS, all of which is against Israel and has been deemed anti-Semitic at its core by the U.S. State Department's definition of anti-Semitism. Most recently, the group has forced shops selling Israeli cosmetics to close, like the one owned by UK citizen Nissan Ayelan, who was forced to move his business 3 times, starting from scratch every time, before finally giving up and fleeing the country. He said, "Eventually I lost faith in being able to make a life once again in Britain." He said, "I just couldn't keep moving to a new city every 2 years. I had a family to look after." The true litmus test of anti-Semitism is whether the actions are against Jews per se, which is bigotry, or simply making a political statement. The BDS movement holds Jews to a different standard than a similar conflicts around the world. It's a clear case of anti-Semitism. Moreover, it is known fact that while the movement has created little damage to Israel, the movement significantly harms the Palestinian people. Another litmus test of its real reason for being here: anti-Semitism. Businesses that are targeted in Israel and forced to close because of the movement are mainly located in the disputed territories, which are known for employing large numbers of Palestinians, and also for paying them at higher rates than they would receive working for their own Palestinian companies. These jobs not only benefit the individuals themselves, but translate to more tax income for the Palestinian Authority, not to mention the goodwill and peace-building atmosphere these companies have as they create this among Jews and Palestinian workers. But the story doesn't end here. If it did, it would be bad enough. But Germany's interior minister and the Berlin mayor allowed the annual pro-Iranian, pro-Hezbollah Al-Quds, meaning Jerusalem, Day rally to take place in Berlin. The purpose of the rally is traditionally to call for the destruction of the Jewish state. The U.S. Embassy in Germany tweeted, "Germany's federal courts decided years ago that Hezbollah is a unified organization dedicated to the destruction of Israel. Symbols of Hezbollah are banned. Why not the entire organization?" Ironically, just days after the rally, Angela Merkel, Germany's leader, said there is to this day not a single synagogue, not a single daycare center for Jewish children, not a single school for Jewish children that does not need to be guarded by German policemen. The rally also came on the heels of an unprecedented report released by Germany's domestic security agency about how anti-Semitism among the country's Muslim population is a major problem in the country. Not only has Merkel and her Interior Ministry blatantly refused to ban the internationally recognized terror group, but they have refused to even entertain the question. Small wonder that every Jewish establishment in Germany needs police protection. And now, due to our ability to connect halfway across the world with a simple click of a button, this phenomena can be spread throughout the globe. In Australia, the Muslim doctor that's been targeted, intimidated through anti-Semitic campaign for working with a Jewish organization that helps sick Palestinian children is an illustration. This man continues to do his work. He's afraid to go back home, afraid to go see his mother. In 1933, Jewish businesses began to be targeted by Nazis. It was slow. In fact, the first boycott was a one-day affair. It progressed to a campaign of ever-increasing harassment until it culminated in systematic pillaging, forced transfer of ownership to Nazi Party activists, arrests, and ultimately the murder of Jews who owned businesses, of which in Berlin alone there were 50,000. The world is different today, but it's not as different as it might appear to be. It's different in what we are willing to tolerate or not. But the problem with that equation is the fact that our tolerance has become a two-edged sword. In this case, we have extended our tolerance to Islamists who, in the cases above, use Israel as a cover for their anti-Semitism. If anything is as dangerous in our time for Jews as it was in the 1930s Germany, it is the pass Islamists are given when they play the Islamophobia card. That's how our supreme value of tolerance has taken off kilter. We see it here in America in response to blatant displays of anti-Semitism from a congresswoman or two. They have been handed a free pass from their own Democrat Party. If the Western world still has the will, they can call this out and they can stop it. If not, we will all be changing our opinion. Because the one thing, unfortunately, that all who exist on the extremes can agree on is the hatred of Jews. That has been an historical fact and is now a contemporary fact. Isn't it amazing how these things come back around and never change?